This is All 24 News World News Program broadcasting to you live from the capital Algiers. Here are tonight's top stories. Gaza suffers more deadly attacks as European backing for Palestine grows. New recognitions roll in. Spain joins the Hague group, and dock workers across Europe launch a boycott campaign. Also on news tonight, in Morocco, protesters rally against normalization, rising costs and poor health care, facing a crackdown that rights groups call arbitrary. Coming up next, Algeria steps up economic and political ties with Germany and the United States while moving closer to finishing the Kibashar-Gharjbilat railway. And later on, the US and Europe slap fresh sanctions on Iran. Tehran calls them illegal and vows to hit back as Washington keeps pushing for talks. All these stories and more shortly. Hello again and welcome back to the program. First off, in our news tonight, Zionist forces have killed at least 47 Palestinians in a wave of bombings across Gaza Strip. Officials say 20 people were killed when homes sheltering the displaced were struck in Nusayrat camp. Another 19, including women and children, died in the demolition of houses in Gaza City. And in the south, 8 more people, among them 2 children, died due to severe malnutrition. Meanwhile, Palestinian medical sources say 10 more people, including 2 children, have died from starvation and Zionist fire in Gaza. 6 were killed while waiting for aid in Khan Yunis and Rafah, and 2 others near a distribution point south of Wadi Gaza. In Khan Yunis, a 2-month-old baby and a 13-year-old child also lost their lives due to severe malnutrition. In Khan Yunis, charity kitchens have become the last lifeline for a hot meal as thousands of displaced Palestinians struggle with severe food shortages and skyrocketing prices. More on this story now with Zarfarjani.
Long lines stretch on. Men, women and children waiting for hours, hoping to get just enough food to last until tomorrow. The Zionist starvation war makes every plate of rice or soup feels like a small victory, a vital source of comfort for families shattered and in many cases uprooted time and again.
You can see what's like here at the charity kitchen. Food is too expensive in the markets. As our basic necessities, we simply cannot afford them. As for the American aid, it's aid in name only. Aid that leads to death. We can't access it or benefit from it at all. So we have no choice but to come here. Since being displaced from the north, getting food has become so difficult. Sometimes we manage to get something. Other times we return home empty-handed.
The situation is extremely difficult. We come very early in the morning to try to get food for our children, but sometimes the supplies run out before it's our turn, and we're forced to go back home with nothing.
But the needs are overwhelming, and resources are running thin. Thousands are left facing alarming levels of food insecurity, further deepening Gaza's humanitarian crisis.
The food from the charity kitchen is never enough. 1,000 people come from meals, but there is only enough to feed all that number. Even the person running the kitchen can only provide for 5 people, while his own family is made up of 10. What you are enduring here is something no nation has faced for centuries.
Here in Khan Yunis, now a massive camp for those fleeing relentless destruction, faces tell the story, marked by exhaustion and anxiety. They reflect the suffering of constant hunger. For many, waiting in line is a desperate search for even the smallest relief in a crisis with no end in sight.
In another story, US President Donald Trump says talks on his plan to end the war in Gaza are now in their final stages. Speaking to Axios, he voiced confidence that a deal could pave the way for broader peace across the Middle East.
Everyone worked together to reach this agreement, but now the real task is to make it happen. The Arab countries showed remarkable cooperation on this issue, and even the Palestinian Hamas movement is taking part through mediation by those nations. The Arab world is pushing for peace. If we succeed, it will mark a historic day for the Middle East.
In a different development, San Marino has officially recognized the state of Palestine. Foreign Minister Laqab made the announcement at the United Nations General Assembly, calling Palestinian statehood an inalienable right. He warned that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the West Bank has become one of the most painful tragedies of our time.
In this dark hour, responsibility becomes urgent. On May 15th, our parliament unanimously tasked the government with recognizing the state of Palestine within this year. And today, before this assembly, we announced the fulfillment of that mandate. San Marino officially recognizes the state of Palestine as a sovereign and independent nation within safe and internationally recognized borders, in line with United Nations resolutions. I affirm that the establishment of a Palestinian state is an inalienable right of the Palestinian people.
And speaking of the humanitarian crisis, Spain has joined the Hague Group, a coalition of 34 countries, taking Israel to the International Court of Justice over massacres against Palestinians. L'Aratzon reports the move coincided with the UN General Assembly in New York, where Spain demanded accountability and tough measures as the war in Gaza rages on. In January, European port workers met Saturday to step up efforts to block arms shipments to the Zionist entity. Union leaders said they plan to expand the boycott across all European ports, insisting they will not be complicit in the war on Gaza.
We call on everyone to protest and to send the message that we are not complicit in the war on Gaza. We are many, and we are strong for a free Palestine. We, the dock workers, are protesting together and calling for an end to the mass slaughter in Gaza. We are working to define a strategy to prevent the export of weapons from Europe to Israel.
Elsewhere in North Africa, thousands of Moroccans took to the streets of Tangier on Saturday night to denounce the war on Gaza and protest the docking of ships they say are carrying weapons of mass destruction in Moroccan ports. The rally, organized by the Moroccan Front in support of Palestine and against normalization, rang out with chants condemning the Makhzen regime's complicity with the Zionist entity. Demonstrators also reaffirmed that firm rejection of all forms of normalization with the occupying power. In another story from Morocco, crowds poured into the streets of several cities Saturday night in a wave of protests against soaring prices, collapsing public services, and restrictions on freedoms. Witnesses say dozens of activists were assaulted by security forces as they called for better living conditions and decent health care. More now in this report by Yasin Rukti.
In Morocco, dissent was met with a heavy security presence as protesters took to the streets. The unrest, fueled by decades of economic hardship and social neglect, is something many blame on the policies of the Makhzen.
We were just standing there when they started intimidating us. Why? We weren't holding stones or anything. We are peaceful. We're simply demanding our rights, nothing more. Our relatives are dying as they cross the sea into the unknown. Why are we left here, watching helplessly?
The Association of Parents and Scientific Research has no credibility and no real capacity to apply proper research methods. In some universities, you will see dozens of students huddled around a single piece of equipment because there just isn't enough to go around.
The latest protests broke out 2 weeks ago in Agadir after 8 pregnant women died during cesarean sections at a local hospital. The tragedy sparked nationwide outrage over the state of healthcare and fueled anger at deeper systemic failures. Outside Morocco's big cities, life in rural villages and remote hamlets is even harsher. Residents say they've been left behind. struggling with poverty, crumbling infrastructure, and the lack of even the most basic services.
The situation is extremely difficult. We come very early in the morning to try to get food for our children, but sometimes the supplies run out before it's our turn, and we're forced to go back home with nothing.
Across the country, Moroccans are pushing back against state policies, but instead of tackling the grievances, authorities have met protests with crackdowns, a move many fear could only stoke more unrest, unless the deeper issues are addressed. Those voices calling for dignity and justice aren't likely to fade anytime soon.
Moroccan security forces violently cracked down on protesters across several cities Saturday, arresting dozens of demonstrators calling for reforms to the education and health systems. In Rabat, police sealed off parliament with a heavy cordon, while similar scenes unfolded in Casablanca, Tangier and Meknes. Among those detained were prominent activists, including a former head of the Moroccan Association for Human Rights. The Moroccan Association for Human Rights says it will remain in open session to monitor a fierce crackdown on Generation Z protesters demanding social reforms. In a statement Saturday, the group strongly condemned the assaults on demonstrators, calling the response a dangerous security failure. It urged the immediate release of detainees and warned that silencing legitimate demands through force will only deepen social tensions.
The central office of the association was strongly condemning these repressive practices and serious human rights violations, hereby demands the immediate and unconditional release of all detainees, calls for an urgent and impartial investigation into the excessive use of force and degrading practices that accompany the security intervention, calls on the state to uphold freedom of expression and peaceful assembly, as they are fundamental pillars of any process aimed at building the rule of law.
In another development, Algeria and Germany have been reviewing ways to strengthen their already solid political and economic ties ahead of President Abdelmadjid Tebboun's upcoming visit to Berlin. The talks took place Sunday in New York between Foreign Minister and Minister of State and Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf and his German counterpart Johann Vadeful on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. According to Algeria's Foreign Ministry, discussions also covered key regional and international issues, including the situation in the Middle East and ongoing developments in the Sahel-Saharan region. For his part, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Lando has highlighted promising new prospects in trade relations with Algeria, describing them as a gateway to mutually beneficial economic opportunities. In a video posted Sunday by the U.S. Embassy in Algiers, Lando stressed that strengthening these ties holds strategic importance and should serve as a key pillar for shared prosperity.
And this is a message to the great people of Algeria. One of the most exciting things I've been working on lately is opening up the commercial relationship between our two great countries. I think there's amazing opportunities that benefit your people and ours. I was delighted to meet with your foreign minister yesterday in New York to discuss some of these opportunities. I look forward to the chance to visit Algeria. And again, I just want to say how excited I am about the chance for our countries to come closer together and have both of our peoples become more prosperous.
Back home, Algeria says its massive strategic mining railway linking Bachar, Tindouf and Gharj Bilet will be fully completed by the end of this year. Safian Qatar has more details.
In southwest Algeria, a massive railway project is underway, linking Bachar, Tindouf and Gharj Bilet, stretching over 950 kilometers. It's due for completion by year's end and is expected to turn the region into a major industrial and mining center, boosting growth locally and across Africa. The railway is split into three main sections, connecting Algeria to one of the world's largest iron reserves. Starting in Bachar, it runs through Hamagir, El Asal, and Tindouf before reaching Gharj Bilet. The network is built to serve mining operations while boosting logistics and economic infrastructure across southwest. The project also includes railway bridges, new roads, and key water installations. all designed to keep operations stable and efficient in the tough desert environment. At the heart of the project is Africa's largest railway bridge, now rising over Wadi Douara in Bishar province, an engineering landmark that shows how Algeria's turned its desert into a powerful driver of growth. More than just a railway, the Garage Billet line is a strategic investment. It could turn a once isolated desert into a powerhouse for industry and trade, putting Algeria on the fast track to bigger regional influence and long-term growth, and enabling the country to build a diversified, Africa-connected economy that turns its natural wealth into lasting development.
Moving on, sweeping UN sanctions on Iran took effect Sunday for the first time in 10 years after nuclear talks with Western powers collapsed. The measures cover an arms embargo, asset freezes, restrictions on ballistic missile development, as well as bans on nuclear cooperation and certain energy exports. The European Union followed suit, reimposing both UN and EU sanctions under the so-called snapback mechanism. Brussels stressed that only diplomacy can resolve the standoff and urged Tehran to fully cooperate with the IAEA. On a related note, Britain, France and Germany told the UN Security Council on Sunday they had activated the snapback mechanism to reinstate the international sanctions on Iran. In a joint statement, the European Troika warned Tehran against any escalation following the reimposition of UN measures.
In addition, it has for many years been engaged in a nuclear program which goes far beyond any plausible civilian use. For us, it is imperative. Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. Since Iran clearly does not comply with its obligations under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action agreed to in 2015, we had no choice but to trigger the snapback of sanctions. But let me emphasize, we remain open to negotiations on a new agreement. Diplomacy can and should continue.
In response, Iran vowed Sunday to take decisive measures to defend its rights and national interests, rejecting the reinstated UN sanctions as illegal and unjustified. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi accused Washington and the European Troika of deliberately shunning diplomacy on the nuclear issue, warning that their hardline approach will only deepen the crisis.
None of what I have seen in New York suggests that the failure of dialogue is by accident. The US, through rejection of diplomacy, is intent and premised on the miscalculation that might makes right, and the Iranian people will give into bullying. Doubling down on faulty assumptions will not resolve the unnecessary crisis at hand.
For his part, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio urged UN member states on Saturday to swiftly enforce the sanctions to increase pressure on Iran's leadership. He called on Tehran to enter direct negotiations on the nuclear deal in good faith, without delay or provocation.
President Trump has been clear that diplomacy is still an option. A deal remains the best outcome for the Iranian people and the world. For that to happen, Iran must accept direct talks ahead in good faith without stalling or obfuscation. Absent such a deal, it is incumbent on partners to implement snapback sanctions immediately in order to pressure Iran's leaders to do what is right for their nation and best for the safety of the world.
Back to Africa now. Sudan is on the brink of a public health disaster, battling dengue, cholera and malaria all at once as war and heavy rains push its fragile health system to breaking point. Samana Sib reports now.
Health officials in Sudan say tens of thousands may have contracted dengue fever far beyond the 2,000 cases reported last week, most of them in Khartoum. The country is also struggling with cholera and malaria as seasonal rains deepen the crisis in a nation already battered by nearly 30 months of war.
All Sudan states 17 states, and there is malaria in Sudan's 18 states. As a result, the national campaign for all Sudan requires bringing back these resources so that we can work with them. It requires working in all states. The cost for the equipment, pumps and pesticides is estimated at $39 million to cover the entire country at the moment.
Sudan's war between the army and the rapid support forces has wrecked infrastructure, leaving hospitals overwhelmed and sanitation systems in ruins. At Omdurman Hospital, patients lie under mosquito nets, getting little more than basic care like IV paracetamol.
We spread awareness among people about the danger of the diseases spreading these days. Dengue fever, cholera, malaria, and epidemic diseases. There was a big turnout. They came on their own. A big number showed up to take the vaccine and the health center to avoid consequences of these diseases. Prevention is better than treatment. People prefer to get the vaccination better than being infected.
As you can see, people are getting vaccinated behind us. This is the fixed team present at the health centers. There are also teams touring the neighborhoods. Our campaign is not restricted to cholera, it's more general, including cholera, dengue fever and malaria, God willing.
Cholera may be relatively contained in the capital, but it's surging in Darfur, with more than 12,700 cases, most of them in Tawila, which is now sheltering hundreds of thousands displaced from Al-Fashir. Health officials, with support from the World Health Organization, are rolling out vaccinations, but aid cards are slowing the response. Sudan says it needs $39 million to get the crisis under control. So, in a nutshell, Sudan is fighting a triple health crisis on top of a grinding war, and the clock is ticking. Without more funding and faster aid, doctors say the outbreak could spiral even further, turning an already dire situation into a full-blown catastrophe.
It's time to catch up on more international news stories in the News in Brief with Karim Mustafawi.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced on Sunday that Russia has launched a massive drone and missile attack on Ukraine, killing 4 people and damaging civilian infrastructure. Zelensky added, following the Russian attack, that Moscow seeks to continue the war and deserves nothing but the strongest pressure from the international community. The International Monetary Fund sounded the alarm about the global economic situation. In her opening message to the fund's annual report, the managing director warned of a slowdown ahead, with growth weakening and debt levels climbing. She highlighted that IMF's mission is more critical than ever. Vietnam evacuated thousands from central and northern provinces on Sunday as Typhoon Boaloi moved in faster than expected, with landfall due later in the day. Local authorities suspended operations at 4 coastal airports, including Da Nang International, and adjusted flight schedules. Algerian para-athlete Nassima Saifi secured her country's first gold medal at the World Para-Athletics Championships currently taking place in New Delhi. Nassima Saifi won the gold medal in the women's discus throw F57 category, recording a throw of 34.54 meters on her 6th and final attempt.
And that's all for our news program for tonight. For the latest updates, be sure to follow us on our social media platforms as well as our website. From all of us here in All 24 News, thank you for watching. Have a wonderful night.